Welcome to APCUG's Wednesday workshops, where we get together in the middle of the week and learn more about technology. This is the third Wednesday of the month, and that means we're here to do more information and learning about Linux. We have a number of different projects or topics that we're going to try to cover, so we're going to jump right to what we're going to do. And today, we added something at the last minute last night because it just came out. And so yesterday, Mint 22.2 came out. Trying to get about a month or so ago, maybe 2 months, I did a presentation on release cycles. And one of the things that we had talked about were in between releases. A lot of the distros that we are recommending have what we call long-term support, and they are good for let's say 4 to 5 years of support. And then we have what we call point releases, and that's where during the term of the long-term support, some distros will give a little bit of an extra. Most of the time, the point releases are for the new people who are starting to use that distro, so they don't have to do all of the previous updates from the 0.0. With these long terms, you can stay with, as an example that we're using, Linux Mint 20.0, you can stay with that for the whole 5 years with full support and work fine. Most of the time, the point releases take care of little problems that aren't really things that are of great importance to everybody. And so what we tell people to do is that when a point release comes out, like it did today or yesterday, that look through it and see, is there anything that is really exciting, knocking your socks off and whatever. And if it's not, then don't update to it. Continue with what you're doing. This 21.2, you can upgrade from 20.0 or 20.1 if you think things are what you need. If not, you could wait till maybe 21.3 comes out. And then, of course, you can always wait until the next long term every 2 years for Mint and just jump to the new long-term support. So I thought we'd just take a quick run through and find out what a few of the changes are for Mint. Now, I'll tell you that I went through the Mate and the XFCE since I was working on that, and they were identical except for one that I'll mention at the end. But as we look through here, we'll see that we have a new Slick greeter that would be on the top of your screen that you can change some language or whatever. And hey, you know, Slick, okay, I see what that is. There is a new change to the onboard keyboard that you can do a better job of customizing it. It says that the software manager, a new refreshing look. Now, does that mean it works any better or different? No, it just has a new refreshing look. If that's not your bag, yeah, it's not important. The PIX program has been just kind of updated a little bit. What you have with the 20.0 or 21.0, 21.1 is workable and works fine, but there's made a little bit of a change by the people who make GThumb. So Mint takes their fork of it called Pix and kind of updated that. Nothing, it's really big if you look through that to say, oh, I'm not a real big photographer person. Another change that Some people see they decided to change the folders again. Last time the folders had a little slant line in them, and I guess people didn't like it as well. So for the 22, they're going to change it back to just having a folder with colored tabs and the icons. And they've said we got some neat kind of colors that we use. And so, you know, if that was a big thing for you, you might want to change it to get the new look in the folders. There's a little bit of change in some of the tool tips that you can see that maybe read easier. Here's one. The title bar buttons, that the minimize, maximize, and close, have been realigned. Now, I didn't realize that in the ones I've been using, it's been a problem, but somebody thought we should realign it. We're also making a change to the icons in your menus, whereas it's not going to change colors, or it will, you know, it's a symbolic icon instead of the mono one. Okay, all these are little small changes. They've done a thing with the desktop portal. This might be something. It crosses all three versions of Mint, and it deals with making sure that it works with non-native applications, such as the Flatpaks a lot of people use, or GNOME apps. If you're having problem with some of those, maybe you would want to do the upgrade. Warpinator is going through a little change. We've talked about it before, and since I just use it personally at home, I didn't know there was some kind of a problem, but evidently if you use it in an office situation with a lot of other computers where you can share with other people, they've got to make some change because there was a kind of a bug. So they're working on that. So that's changed. What other improvements? Blue Man is the Bluetooth program. It's kind of been upgraded. Not a big problem. The other one still works different. They've changed some of the themes. XReader, it defaults to page mode when you're in a maximum window. You know, and some people say, well, I can easily change that to a page mode myself. As Judy always likes, a new set of additional backgrounds that can be added. So there's tons of backgrounds. If you don't need any new backgrounds, you might not need this. And no change to the version of Mate that it's using. Now, this is the one change that XFC had. Everything else was the identical set of instructions, except the 21.2 Mint XFC is now using the newest version of XFCE, which is the 0.18. So going back, these are the changes in the 21.1 to 21.2. So you look them over, and this applies, you know, for Ubuntu when they do their point releases or somebody else. You need to look through them and find out, are there anything that I really want in that? Now, as an XFCE user, you probably would want to move up to Mint 21.2 to get the newest version of XFCE's desktop environment. But otherwise, maybe not. You can go, for those of you who are using the Cinnamon version, you can go check their list, but I'm going to guess that 95% of everything that you saw is exactly the same that is happening there. So that's what's the news today. And this happens all the time. You just have to make the decision. Are you pleased with what you're using? It works fine. Stick with it. Okay, so new updates come and go. You choose. Like I said, if I'm running the Mint XFCE, I would update to 21.2. If using Mate, I haven't decided yet. It just came out.
How do you find out that there's a new version of something out there?
In Linux Mint, we had a big notification pop up. And right beside on mine, it's not going to be there now because it's gone. But right beside where the update was, there was another big note book or notepad or some kind of an icon that was a big system notification. When you click on it, it says there is a new version, and click if you want to go to it. Click here to see if you want to find out about it. Everybody should be able to go to their update manager, and under one of the drop downs, it'll say there's a version update. Click it, make a backup first with your time shift, and then on you go.
Thank you.
All right, so check those out with your own distribution that you're using. Windows kind of has that every 6 months, but with Windows, you don't have a choice. It's going to come. You got to take it. All right. Yes.
A comment.
Yes.
It's interesting as you went through those changes. Oh, we went back the way it was before because you guys seem to like that better. As a Windows person, I appreciated that because change for just changing just for the heck of it often isn't the best thing to do.
That's true. All right, so as we have now changed the order of our agenda, because I didn't know all these past months, we're going to switch to Orv Beach, and we're going to have our next chapter of our Taming the Terminal. And so Orv, instruct us.
All right. Let me see, share desktop 1. How's that, John?
Looks good.
Okay, 5th chapter of Taming the Terminal, and earlier I was discussing with John, we've gone through all of the fairly basic command line commands, the most common ones in the previous chapters. And we're getting to the point where the commands, to explain them properly, for instance, the last one I'm going to discuss, or one of the last today, to do it justice would be, I don't know, 1 to 2 hours thoroughly. So they're getting a lot more featureful, a lot more complex, and it doesn't do a lot of good to show a command if you can't interpret the results, and that takes a little bit more knowledge. So I think what I'm trying to say is, if you've gone through all of these and survived and understood them all, congratulations, you've graduated from beginning Linux to probably intermediate. And what that implies is you're probably better off with the more complex commands that we can't really cover here, Googling them. And the way I tell people is you just Google it and precede it with Linux or even your distro name like Mint, and there's no question you can ask that hasn't been asked multiple times. So I think John and I are going to discuss how much farther we're going to continue this before we do something else. And with that said, we'll get started here. If you've used Linux on the command line at all, you recognize ifconfig to show your network configuration for your Ethernet interface, or wireless for that matter. It's been deprecated. I probably won't go away anytime soon, but the replacement command is IP with a whole bunch of switches. And here I've shown the IP space A, which is short for adder, which is short for address. You can use any of the three. And you can see there's a ton of information on here, very cryptic looking. I'm getting to the point where I learn something about these commands every time I research them. Turns out what this is displaying is not only the IPv4 information for all of your interfaces, but the IPv6, which is quite a bit more complex. And even the Linux geeks I know, a tiny fraction of them use IPv6. So it's really not necessary to view it. And it turns out there's a simplified way. IP-4 means show IPv4 information only. And I've asked for the address information, and you can see it's slimmed down quite a bit and vastly simplified. In the red, I've highlighted the 3 interfaces on this particular computer I took this screenshot from, which was obviously a Linux laptop. LO is the loopback. Every Linux machine and every Unix machine, for that matter, has a loopback interface. Data sent to the loopback goes out a virtual port, not a physical one, and comes right back in. And you might want to say, well, why is that needed? Linux programs can be multi-platform. In other words, you might have a person entering data on a computer, sending it to a database on a remote server, in which case it would go out a physical port. But if that database and the data entry program are on the same machine, it'd be silly to send it out to a network switch and right back in. So it just uses the loopback in that case. You'll see on this particular computer, interface number 2 is ENP3S0F1. It used to be that Ethernet interfaces on Linux were just ETH0, ETH1, ETH2. But the problem with those is, if back in the day when we had plug-in cards, if you move the card, it would change from ETH0 to ETH2 or something depending on the slot. Well, what they've done now is they've fixed them to the, I think it's a PCI interface. It never changes. So it's a little more complex to type, but it never changes. And interface number 3 is my wireless WLP2S0. And you'll notice, attentive viewers will notice that there's something wrong with this. And I did it deliberately here. I have both, you'll notice there's IP addresses associated with both the physical interface, number 2, and the wireless interface, number 3. Well, what's wrong with that picture? Unless you jump through hoops, you can only have one default gateway. In other words, that's the network interface on your computer, where the computer sends things that aren't on the same subnet. If you have 2 laptops in your house and you're sending data between them, it doesn't need a gateway. It can go directly to any address in the same subnet. And by subnet, I mean 192.168.1.anything, for instance. Well, I've got 2 active network interfaces on this computer. So which is the default gateway? That's a great question. Near as I can tell, it's the last one you brought up. This is not something you'd want to do normally. I just happened to enable it just to show the interfaces. You won't normally see this. And here you can see, trying to remember IP-4A is a pain. It turns out there are aliases. You can substitute a set of characters for a much longer one. So alias, I decided to call it IP4A, and it is the substitute for IP-4A. And you can see it says it, okay, I aliased it. And now if I type IP4A, I get the information I need. I could have just called it IP4 or just IP, but you don't want to do IP because sometimes you want to use other options with IP, and I'll show a couple of those. Here's another command. If you want to make the alias persistent, there's a file that's .bashrc in your home directory. Those are an RC file is a run command file. These are files that are executed when some other program starts. And when you start up a terminal, in this case bash, it runs everything in .bashrc. So you would put, the way to enable your alias is either log out or in, or there's another command called source. You source the .bashrc, it rereads it. That keeps you from having to log in or log out. This is good for testing aliases. No, that's not quite what I want. Edit again, source it again, and try it till you get right. So yet another useful command. Actually 2, aliases and source. Moving along, IP-4, because I don't want to know about IPv6 route show. Like I said, every computer should have one route and one route only, one default route. You can manually set up alternate routes. I could have said if you're trying to go to a 10 dot something address, go out Ethernet port on that laptop. But I don't. I just turn off the wireless. So anyway, you can see on this particular computer, which is SC, that's my wife's laptop machine. I may have mentioned this before. Many years ago, when she was late to the computing arena, and you know how it is bringing somebody up to speed when they've never used a computer before. She referred to it as stupid computer. So it's been SC ever since. Anyway, the default route is out 192.168.1.1. That's pretty vanilla for a home setup. Down the 169 address is, I'm not sure why it's there, but you'll see that on a Windows machine. It's self-assigned. It's when it didn't get an IP address via DHCP. And this machine is not a DHCP, it's actually static. If you look at the last line, you can see off to the right, the source address, in other words, where stuff goes out, is .105, and I've assigned that as a static. Where did I see that? I saw it here someplace. Anyway, her machine is one of the few ones that's got a static IP on my home network. So that's, excuse me, IP-4, wget alias, route show. Okay, I'm going to talk about compressing and expanding files and libraries. There's a, as typical in Linux, there's many different ways to do it. As a home Linux user, you'll probably very rarely, if ever, create a compressed file. You'll much more frequently expand one. But for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to show you how to compress one and then expand it. So anyway, I've got a file called example.txt. You can see I said ls-lh, example.txt. ls-l shows all the files in rows. H is human readable. And you can see that it says instead of 176,000 bytes, it's 176K. You can see I zipped it with using the zip command. And I decided to call it example.zip. You don't have to, but I just did. And include the file example.txt. It added example.txt, and it told you that it compressed it 83%. It was able to do that because this is a pure text file. If it had been a binary file, like a video or a program, you would have gotten a much smaller amount of compression. That's because one of the methods they use for compressing, ASCII text characters only use 7 of the 8 bits in each byte. So they're highly compressible because it throws that away. The exception is Unicode. If you know about Unicode, so you can show Japanese or Chinese characters, for example, they are actually 2 bytes of code. So they're not that compressible either. Anyway, you can see the results of compressing it. I've got the original example.txt, and I've now got example.zip. You can see it's in red. Bash, this particular version of Bash, and I think most of them, will color code various types of file. And we've talked about this before. Directories are blue, executables are green, and I think compressed files are red. And you can see that it did a good job of compressing it. It's down to 31K. If you unzip it, like unzip example.zip, it's going to ask you, do you want to overwrite it, rename it, do nothing? What? I said, yeah, overwrite it, yes, and replace it, and it inflated it. So that's how you unzip something in Linux on the command line. Zip and then unzip. There's also a version of file compression called gzip, and actually is GNU zip, and I won't go into why it's called GNU because it's only funny to geeks. Anyway, we've got our typical example.txt, and you can see it's the 176K. I gzipped it, and then you can see that I did an ls-lh example star. The star means show me anything that starts with example. Well, you can see there's no example.txt anymore. It has consumed it and is now example.txt.gz or GNU zip. And you can see it's 31K. If I g-unzip it, you can see now that it unzipped it and the gzip file disappeared. It is now back to example.txt. So that's gzip and g-unzip. If you see a .gz file, you can g-unzip it. There's yet another compression method called bzip. I think it's bzip2 actually. And those are the commands bzip2 and bunzip2. And I took our typical example.txt and ran it through bzip, and it wound up being example.txt.bz2. Excuse me, and it was 23K. So you can see it's a little bit more efficient than gzip or zip because they wound up, I think, 31K. And again, if you bunzip it, the bzipped file disappears and our example.txt file reappears. Okay, you see 7-zip used a lot in the Windows world, a lot less. But if you have to extract a 7-zip file, you can do it on Linux. It is not installed by default, and it's a bit of a mess. There's 2 versions of 7-zip, but if you use your package manager to install it, I think you'll get 7Z, 7ZA, 7ZR, and maybe 7ZZ. It was pretty confusing. So anyway, what you do is, it's very verbose. Up at the top, I did 7Z space A for add to example.7z, add our file example.txt, and it goes down here and goes blah, 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 blah. And you can see in this case, it created an example.7z, but left example.txt like zip does. And I didn't do an ls minus lh, but you can see it's 24K as opposed to the original 179K. So did a good job of zipping. The way you extract it, where is it here? Hang on. Oh, it's right up at the tippy top. Let me, 7Z space E for extract, example.7z, and it blah, 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 down to the bottom, and it said it extracted it, and it's now 179K. I didn't do the ls minus lh because you know the drill, but it said it was previously 24K bytes, and now it's 179K. I don't need to talk about that anymore. If you're using Linux, I would say skip 7Z and go to some of the more common zip and unzip files. Excuse me. Okay. Back in the olden days, when computers were really big, as were disk drives physically, but didn't hold a lot, you needed a place for offline storage because you didn't have enough disk space. Back in this era here, 5 megabyte and 10 megabyte disk drives are about as large as you could get. So they developed tape drives. The original tape drive was 6,250 bits, not bytes, bits per inch of tape. So you would take about an inch and a quarter of tape per byte. So you can see you had a lot of tapes and a lot of tape drives. Over time, the tape density and tape speed increased a lot. But these are pretty original. If you've never seen one of these, obviously you want to get the data on and off the tape as fast as possible. So the tape speeds were quite fast and tape breakage was a problem. And if you look at one of these tape drives down underneath the tape assembly itself, you can see a couple of slots. There's one for the tape take up and one for the supply. And they're vacuum columns. They keep them at a vacuum, and there's a long loop of tape down and back up in each one of them to take up starts and stops, jerks and stuff like that. So anyway, they had to have a program to manage putting data onto these storage devices, and it was not just files, it was files in directories. They get quite complex and quite deep. So they developed something called tar, the tape archive utility. Here's an example .text, and the tar command is tar cf. Create the file example.tar and put example.txt in it. And you can see that example.tar is there, which is the tarred file, that's what they're called, alongside example.txt. And you can see the tar doesn't do any compression by itself. In fact, it adds a little to it because there's an internal structure to the tar file to tell it what's inside. It's probably a directory or something. And it goes downhill from here. Being able to handle multiple files means you have to put multiple files in there. And the command is tar cf file example.tar. It doesn't have to be called example. And then put everything in there, example question.text. And you probably know question mark is a wildcard for a single character. So it basically says find all the files that start with example and have one character and then .text. And it put in the three example files, 1, 2, and 3, into example.tar. And you can see that it's 3 times plus a little bit the size of the file. So obviously no compression done at this point. Okay, you can use compression. You can see the file there, the command tar zcvf, and it's the create file CNF. Z means use gzip, and V just means verbose. So I ran it against example question.text, and it said I included these 3 files. And now if you do an ls -lh, you can see now we have example.tar.gz as the resultant file, and you can see it's quite small. It's been compressed. I don't know if they compress each individual file or they compress the tar file. I suspect it's the latter. Okay, so I'm going to extract it, but before I do that, I'm going to remove, you can see rm example question.text. The only thing I have left is example.tar.gz. The command is tar zxvf. X is extract. And the reason I've got it in yellow, the vast majority of the time when you have a tar file, somebody will have compressed it and it will be a tar.gz. Or it can be .tgz. And you can see I ran tar zxvf against example.tar.gz and extracted all 3 of the example files. You'll also see the suffix .tgz. That means a tar.gzipped file. And to confuse it even more, you can use bzip. You'd think that might be B, tar bxvf, but no. If you look down at the bottom, if you want to use bzip2 as your compression, it's -J. Obvious, right? So this is the stuff that you have to Google examples for if you're doing anything other than the typical 99.9% of the time. If you get a tar file, it'll be gzipped and it'll have one of these 2 suffixes, and you just tar zxvf and poof, done. And by the way, if these 3, say example.txt files, were in a subdirectory, the tar would create that subdirectory and extract them into that subdirectory. So just be aware of that. So the other thing I want to talk about is wget. When you want to pull something down off of a website and you don't want to right-click Save As, you can open up a command line and do a wget and then paste the URL of the file you're looking at, and it will extract or pull it down. And you can see I did a wget on a file called genealogy.zip that happened to be on my website. And it resolved orbsplace.net. It got connected to port 80 in this case. And if you can do HTTPS, and it'll look for port 443. Requested response, 66 megabit file. You can see at this screenshot, it was in process, a little over half done, pulling it down at 13.5 megabytes per second. And here it's completed. Said it took 6.6 seconds to do it, to pull it down. Now it's in my downloads. There are a lot of commands. You can retrieve an entire subdirectory or an entire website if you're not careful, because that's a lot of megabytes. I don't want to go through all of the switches. There are a lot of wget examples out there. And if you want to use it for more than just pulling down a file, I suggest you read up on it. I am done. I don't want to fry your brain any more than that. Quick and dirty. How's that, John?
I got some notes today. I always thought that 7-zip, that's the new, bigger one. I should be using it. And now today it's saying, well, maybe the bzip or the gzip might be better to use.
Gzip is by far the most common.
Tell me again, why would I want to do tar and not just plain zipping?
Can zip do subdirectories?
Okay.
No. I don't know. I don't use it that much. If it can, then there's no reason why not. Tar is historically very popular. Let's put it that way. It was the first.
Yeah, I always see that, and it made me scared when I saw all that stuff about what to do, and then realized just if you know the command, it just does it. It's not a big deal. It's just, It looks scary with tar and feathers and stuff like that.
Yeah, and if you're going to use tar to create zipped files, then you have a lot of decisions to make, like, am I going to put them in directories, blah, blah, blah. But as ordinary users, we won't do a lot of creation. It'll just be extraction.
I have some questions. What's the difference between source BASHRC and / same letters?
Well, if you're going to source .bashrc, it expects it to be in the same directory. If you put a / in front of it, it expects it to be in a subdirectory. I don't think that would work.
Okay.
Let me look at mine.
I didn't phrase the question correctly, I guess, or what I've done to reactivate the .rc file is do a // rc file, the bash rc, which reactivates the rc file. I just wondered what the difference is.
I don't know, but again, there's multiple ways to do things in Linux.
Oh, okay, that's all. It may be the exact same thing.
The source command would be more easily integrated into a script, I would think.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
And Dave, you did have it correct. It's just that I'm working with 3 screens here. I didn't see those little tiny dots.
Okay.
But when I got my nose almost up to it, then I could. Is there a GUI app to extract files from a tar.gz file?
Oh, thank you for reminding me. I was going to mention that. Most of the file managers, I use KDE Plasma, and Dolphin is the manager, the file manager of choice for Plasma. And when you right-click on a compressed file, any sort, it will ask you if you want to extract it, and it will invoke the built-in extractor. And I would suspect that GNOME has the same thing. In other words, you don't have to use command line. But since that's what I'm teaching, that's what I used. Honestly, when I pull down a compressed file, I right-click on it, and Plasma says, do you want to use ARK, ARK, which is their built-in? It's not, when I say built-in, that's incorrect. It invokes the existing commands. A lot of GUI commands behind the scenes just invoke the command line. But as a GUI user, who cares?
A tip, artificial intelligence can be used to generate bash scripts to do simple commands. Example, generate a bash script to back up my documents to an external drive. It
Yep.
rears its head everywhere.
Yep. Programmers are using it, but they have to check the results carefully because at this point in AI development, they do go off the rails occasionally. They call it hallucinating. They just create random crap that you really have to sanity check the results.
Andy Kerrigan, you have a question or a comment. It's your turn.
As soon as I let him.
Unmute, please.
Okay, I just did. Great presentation. Just a couple of comments. We're just talking about bash aliases a couple of weeks ago, and on Linux Mint anyway, in the home directory .bashrc, they actually recommend or suggest that you put your aliases in a separate file.
Yes.
And I thought that was kind of cool because then if you do an update, you're not going to whack out your bashrc inadvertently.
That's true.
And you can always back them up.
Yeah, and it's not just .bashrc. Quite a few programs will say if you're going to put some custom commands or configuration in, for instance, I don't know, Mattermost on the Mattermost server or the Mattermost client for that matter. Actually, I'll use the web browser, or I'm sorry, the web server. I'm zoning, LAMP, Linux. What's the most popular web server? I'm zoning. Anyway, it has thank you. Geez, getting senile. Anyway, in /etc, there's an Apache configuration directory with all sorts of subdirectories, but there's each one of those directories has a subdirectory called .d. And that .d is where you put your custom commands. And more programs are doing that for their configuration. So yeah, that makes sense for .bashrc.
Okay, the other comment was the aliases, when you're doing the aliases, because I have fat fingers, I can't type well, and I can't remember all the crap that you're supposed to type. That's a technical term.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever, what I've been using, or what I find very convenient, is an app that was recommended, I think, on DistroWatch years ago, called TLDR, as in too long, don't read.
Yeah, didn't read, yeah.
But if you go to the, you can actually go to, there's a website, and I can put the link in the chat for Judy, and probably not going to download it, but it's 3998 pages, almost 4,000 pages, one page at a time, basically. But it's quick on your machine. Instead of typing in the man page, you do TLDR, and instead of looking at 3, 4, 5 screens of all kinds of arcane crap that you're never going to use, it gives you the most common features. It's kind of a neat feature.
That's good. There used to be things called newbieized help files were similar. I can see that TLDR is supplanted them. I'm gonna have to, let me see, is it installed? Nope. Search.
I think it's great. It takes, if you're using a new command, something you haven't used before, it has to go out and re-index their database, wherever that might be.
Yeah.
But for me, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, because like I just did it on the tar command, and instead of, I'm sure, well, if I did a man tar, Mantar is, I just passed 6 pages.
Yeah, it's messy.
On the man. But if you do a TLDR on tar for TLDR, it's not even a half a screen. But it gives the options, C, and with examples.
Good.
So
by the way,
it's kind of neat.
Good. That's good to know. I'm going to install this. John, our readers would like to be interested to know that TLDR is in the Ubuntu repository. So you can just install it. So I'm going to do that right now.
Users, learning with users, outstanding. Will a 7-zip file from a Windows machine be expanded with CR/LF or new line?
That depends on the contents. It just extracts the file as it is. What he's talking about is in the Linux world, the end of line terminator is line feed. In the Windows world, it's carriage return line feed, or maybe it's the other way around. Most text editors can deal with that now. But as far as extracting something, it'll come back. If it was a Windows text file and you unzip it on Linux, you'll find a Windows text file. So depending on what you're going to use it with, you may have to massage the file. Like I said, most text editors nowadays can deal with that and say, oh, this needs carriage returns at the end of each line. Or you can tell it. Is that too much information?
No. I thought it was useful. Have you used the Nala utility on GitHub?
The which one?
NALA.
I have not.
You might want to look into that, per Tim from Chicago.
Okay.
The teacher learns something new. Don't we love it when we do that?
Oh, I've been using 28 years. I've been using Linux, and I learn something new every week, and every time I prepare one of these presentations.
Cool. I like to learn something new every single day, a minimum of one thing. Okay, Orv, those are my questions. Thank you so much, as usual, for a great presentation.
Happy to do it.
Goodbye to whatever you do after this.
Hasta la vista, baby.
You got it.